Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, if the President were to declare a national emergency over climate change, would he be able to reprogram money from DOD to respond to that emergency using existing transfer authority?
I don't know, Congressman.
You don't know, okay. Would there be a limit how much money the President could reprogram to have the Pentagon pay for that declared national emergency?
I just don't know. It's speculative, and I'm not a lawyer, so.
Well, you are the Secretary of Defense, and they just reprogrammed a lot of money away from us. Do you have an opinion on that?
I know that is legally available to us because the DOD lawyers and the White House lawyers and the Department of Homeland Security lawyers have advised me that it is legally available.
It's legally available because the President has declared that the border is an emergency. So therefore, if we have any other President declaring something random an emergency, don't you think the same authorization would be legal at that point?
Well, again, I'm not going to speculate.
Okay. So there, in that case, then also you wouldn't be able to speculate what accounts would be available to be reprogrammed. So is it ships, troop pay, military construction? All that should be fair game according to the ideology this President is using in terms of reprogramming.
I'm not going to speculate.
General Milley, let me get your advice then. Does the recent reprogramming notification that we receive, taking money away from what you have previously briefed us as critical department needs, does that constitute a threat to the defense of the nation now that we have reprogrammed that money?
I was, in this particular case, I was asked to conduct a formal assessment. I did that, submitted it to the Secretary of Defense in writing. And in short, what I said was that this reprogramming of $3.8 billion was not a significant, immediate, strategic, negative impact to the overall defense of the United States of America. Those are precisely selected words. So strategic and overall. It's 0.5% of the overall budget. So I can't in conscience say that it's, significant, it's immediate, it's going to, the sky is falling, it's going to be a dramatic decrement in the preparedness of the U.S. military to defend ourselves. We can defend the United States of America. So I had to do a risk assessment. I did that, and that's what I said.
Thank you. Thank you, General. Let's move on to the Army 5th Corps headquarters in Europe. And I'll start with Secretary Esper. I was really pleased to actually see that we're reactivating the 5th Corps. And I understand it's focused on our interests and national security in Europe. And I think we all here applaud that without a doubt. But my question is, if 5th Corps is European focused, why was the decision made for it to be based in Fort Knox?
I'd have to refer you to the Army for that answer, Mr. Gallego. I don't know why they chose Fort Knox as the basing location.
Okay. Generally, I don't know if you have any insight into this.
Yeah, I mean, it's an Army. In the rule sets that we operate by, basing decisions are service secretary decisions. But having said that, just a short while ago, I've been the Chief of Staff of the Army. It was discussed that it's been out there for quite a while, the entire decision-making process. The bottom line is, do you want a forward-based permanent force, or do you want to rotate it through? And what's the needs of the combatant commander? And the consensus, the decisions were made with then Scaparrotti, now Walters, fully involved in the decision-making, that it's best to have a CONUS base, continental U.S. base, and rotate forward a small forward command post that can then move around to various countries within Europe, rather than be tied to a given base and have a big structure put in Europe. So that was the logic behind it, and that's why we decided to base it in the United States, and the Army decided Fort Knox.
Was there a General? Thank you for that answer. Was there a cost-benefit analysis between having it in Europe or other places in Europe and here at CONUS?
Cost-benefit analysis, I would say yes. I'd have to check with Secretary McCarthy for a final analysis on that. But I would say yes, because cost-benefit analysis is part of the process of basing decisions, along with environmental impact statements and all kinds of other things. There's an entire checklist of requirements you have to do a basing decision, and cost-benefit analysis is part of that.
And just to drill down a little deeper, when doing the cost-benefit analysis between Europe or European headquarters and CONUS, there was a actual analysis of European potential sites. They weren't just automatically excluded from that cost-benefit analysis.
I can't answer that specifically.
Okay.
But I would tell you at a broader level, and for several years, I have been an advocate within the Department of Defense on rotating forces forward and minimizing forward presence and permanent basing in foreign countries. There's reasons for that. Force protection is a key part of that, but also expense. It's very expensive to have us, U.S. military, with our families, et cetera, and DOD schools and commissaries and PXs and all that. And it's operationally, it's much more useful if the combatant commander can move forces around quickly without thinking about having to well, I'm taking them away from their family for 2 or 3 weeks or whatever. If you deploy on a rotational basis as a soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, you're much more flexible if you are operating on a rotational basis. That's why the Army went to brigades, for example, to rotate into Korea. So I'm an advocate for
the gentleman's time has expired.
Presence.
If you could just sum that up. So I don't want to.
Yeah. Advocate for minimizing forward presence, and I'm an advocate for rotating forces forward.
Thank you, General. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not necessarily blame this on you, but would appreciate your assistance with it. We received your testimony sometime around 5 p.m. yesterday afternoon, just shortly before that. I know that you have to submit your testimony, I believe, to OPM, and then OPM has to approve it before it actually comes to committee staff. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you, with your history, understand when we receive it at 5 p.m. or thereabout, and the hearing is the next morning at 10 a.m., that has become more commonplace than not, and would appreciate your help in having those reports submitted in a more timely manner. Some of us do. I think most of us personally read them, and if not get the opportunity to personally read them, have somebody in our office point out the highlights.
Absolutely. I wasn't aware of that, so we do want to get it to you on time for sure.
General Milley, you mentioned the F-35 versus the A-10. My understanding is that a report was due at the end of 2019 from the Operational Test and Evaluation Office, comparison between the F-35 and the A-10 on the close air support mission. Has that report been completed?
I honestly don't know. I can give you a comparison from my own personal experience, having not called in close air support from a F-35, but on an A-10. A-10 is a great weapon system too. So when it comes to close air support, we on the ground, we really don't care where that bomb comes from as long as it shows up. And all of these weapon systems are very, very effective. The A-10 has proven extraordinarily effective in Afghanistan and Iraq. But the F-35 is your next generation. If you start looking at great power competition, it's the F-35.
Absolutely, but from a close air support mission, the F-35, depending on which variant, has between 182 and 220 rounds of ammunition.
Roger that.
And that is in prior National Defense Authorization Acts and appropriation measures, we have prohibited the drawing down of the A-10 until the DOD could convince this body, the legislative branch of the government, that the F-35 was capable of handling the close air support mission. And yet the one thing that is not mentioned in either of your testimonies is the fact that you have proposed to draw down 44 of the current A-10s that are in the inventory. And so that is...
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to, decisions like that are secretaries, so I'm not going to get into secretaries, but from an advice standpoint, there's a fundamental issue at stake here, which is, and it's coming up in a lot of areas, whether it's tankers and maritime and ships and, whatever it is. It's a question of divest to invest. We are at a pivot point, in my opinion. My military assessment is we're at a pivot point relative to the changing character of war and the geopolitical landscape that's occurring in the world today. And we've got to make some fundamental choices and to lay down the markers for what that future military is going to look like 5, 10 years. And if we don't make those hard choices, then we're going to be in the short end of the stick here 10 years from now, 15 years from now. So,
if I could, General Milley, war is a decision between the bad and the worse.
That's right.
And budgets are decisions between the needs and the needs more.
Yep, that's right.
My concern with what I see from the department is sometimes we give up a weapon system that is extremely efficient to operate and extremely effective.
Yep.
In the hopes that we're going to have one that's better at some point in the future.
Right.
And in the private sector, nobody would give up the system that works until the replacement system had proven itself.
Right.
Both capable and efficient. And I know, Secretary Esper, you were about to make a statement.
Just, I know because you're short on time. Just like the Navy did with older ships, what the Air Force is trying to do is retire a number of aircraft. It's not just some A-10s, but it's tankers and B-1s and F-15s. I don't think what they're trying to do is retire older aircraft that are cost more to maintain and operate than they do. So I don't think what the Air Force is doing was not a statement about the A-10.
Right.
It was a statement about just retiring a legacy aircraft.
I'm down to about 30 seconds. Yep. And I want to say this. ABMS and the J-Stars are at Robins Air Force Base. I think it was a premature decision to cancel the recap of the J-Stars fleet. I think if you could have bought a new platform that was a better platform that would have served its purpose long into the future, cheaper than you can maintain the existing fleet of J-Stars as time goes on. I'm concerned about an article that I read. This is the article, ABMS can't be the sole solution for Joint C2, Army tells Air Force. There are 3 generals quoted in that article, General Wesley, General Gallagher, and General Bassett, I believe, quoted in that article expressing their concerns about the ABMS platform not being able to deliver for the ground troops.
Yeah,
The gentleman's time has expired. I apologize. And I think
I'll get you an answer for the record.
The point has been made.
That's okay.
That'd be great. Yes.
I'm heading out to take a hard look at exactly what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
that's an ongoing discussion.
Yep,
yes,
it is.
We'd love to get an answer. Mr. Moulton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I could not agree more with your statement that we are at a pivot point where we have to modernize our approach to national security. Do you believe in a whole-of-government approach to national security?
110%, yes.
Secretary Mattis has said before Congress that, quote, if you don't fund the State Department fully, that I need to buy more ammunition.
That's right.
You agree with that, Secretary Esper? Do you agree with that statement?
I do. I think we need to fund the interagency, particularly in places like Africa, where the interagency brings a lot to the game.
Great, because that's actually where I'm going. To quote again from Secretary Mattis, what you have to do is you have to make certain that your foreign policy is led by the diplomats, not by the military, end quote. Do you agree with that statement?
I agree.
So, Mr. Secretary, what is the State Department's opinion on the blank slate review in Africa?
They support it. I've had a number of conversations with Secretary Pompeo with regard to the process I'm going through. My aim is to
that's illuminating, because I was just in East Africa, and literally every single military officer and State Department official I spoke to on the ground said that we should both increase State Department and DoD funding and effort for AFRICOM. But your blank slate review is not really a blank slate, because the only options on the table are reducing our commitment to AFRICOM. Isn't that correct?
That is not correct. In fact, I actually approved an increase recently for security forces at Manda Bay. So we are looking at a variety of options. The predominantly ones are to make reductions right now.
Okay, well, there's a fundamental disagreement between you and the AFRICOM commander then, because he briefed me that the only options were reducing the presence.
They are predominantly to reduce presence, but if they have a proposal to increase, I would look at anything. But it is a blank slate review, and I can't speak to what State Department is doing with regard to how they look at the situation.
Well, the State Department people on the ground said they haven't even been asked. So you might suggest that that Secretary Pompeo actually ask his people on the ground what they think. I mean, I do know that in 2018, President Xi announced that China will be providing $60 billion in financial support to Africa. China now has surpassed the U.S. as Africa's largest trading partner. They have troops on the ground in Africa for the first time ever. So we've got a rising threat from China to meet right on the ground in Africa.
Well, this is why what I'm trying to look at is make sure we're properly positioned and right-sized to deal with great power competition. My sense is right now we're focused maybe too much on counterterrorism. So I want to get the balance right with regard to forces. On the other hand, it is not a purely military mission. It requires a whole-of-government approach. The third thing I'd say is, look, we can't play man-to-man defense with the Chinese and Russians in Africa. We have to be very thoughtful with regard to how we allocate our resources, whether it's the military, diplomats, whatever the case may be. Otherwise,
couldn't agree more.
I'll never be able to meet the demands of the imposed.
Couldn't agree more. Mr. Secretary, Republican Mac Thornberry of Texas courageously asked if Congress's military budget next year would matter, or whether you and OMB would simply reprogram money for things like the border wall that the President wants and Congress has not, in our constitutional authority, authorized. Now, you failed to answer the question. You simply said that you hope Congress and the administration will be partners. Mr. Secretary, does the word partners occur in the Constitution describing Congress and the committee's budgetary authority?
No, not that I'm aware of, Congressman.
Mr. Secretary, after you were nominated to be Secretary of Defense of the greatest military in the world, I was pleased to see a smart and accomplished professional in national security, a fellow infantry officer. and someone who I have worked with personally on a number of issues selected to succeed Secretary Mattis. And if you remember, I addressed one pointed question to you, which is this. I said, Secretary Mattis left big shoes to fill, and the single most important thing that he did in your position was he was willing to stand up to the president, to disagree with Donald Trump when he proposed doing things against the national security interests of the United States and our troops. Now, look, we all know that Trump, a draft dodger in great contrast to yourself and the chairman who have served our country for decades, has often done things that are in his own personal or political interests against the national security interests of the United States or the well-being of our troops. Mr. Secretary, have you been willing to not just disagree, but stand up to the president?
I'm not going to speak to my personal conversations with the president, but I can assure you that the president welcomes dissenting views, opposing views, because what he seeks from his advisors is a wide range of opinions that can help him make the best choices.
Mr. Secretary, when you took this job, did you take an oath to the president or to the Constitution?
Constitution of the United States. I've taken that oath multiple times over my 40 years of professional life.
It must be very difficult to reconcile having lived with the West Point Honor Code, that, quote, no cadet shall lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those that do, when working for this president. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Stefanik.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to take the moment to remind members of the rules of the committee and the rules of the House, given the questions asked by Mr. Moulton denigrating the president. But moving on, I want to focus my questions on missile defense. As both you, Secretary Esper, and you, Chairman Milley, are aware, according to the 2019 Missile Defense Review, it states that building a new GBI interceptor site in the continental United States would add interceptor capability against the potential expansion of missile threats to the homeland, including a future Iranian ICBM capability. The decision to do so and site selection will be informed by pertinent factors at the time, particularly emerging threat conditions. So my question is, knowing that we are facing emerging threats, whether it's Iran not abiding by the uranium restrictions in the JCPOA, the ongoing status of North Korea, the cancellation of the redesigned kill vehicle, the 10-year delay with NGI, these are all pertinent factors when it comes to our assessment of emerging threats and the conditions that we're facing. Would this prompt an operational requirement from your perspective for a third CONUS interceptor site?
Congresswoman, what I like to do is take that back to actually my staff, both military and uniform, to get their assessment. Obviously, it has to be threat-driven. Many of the studies have been conducted so far on some of the sites, but it is threat-driven. It probably warrants an update to find out as circumstances have changed on the ground with regard to Iran, in particular. Does it warrant a relook or an updated assessment?
And Chairman Milley, I would like your assessment of the threats as you look to the future for missile defense.
Yeah, basically the same thing. Right now it's a little bit too early to tell with respect to Iran as to whether the need is there yet or not, because we do know that as of today, a intercontinental ballistic missile capable of carrying a nuclear weapon has not been fully developed and tested by Iran. But we don't know what the future is going to hold. So it's something that we're under constant evaluation on. Specifically, what you're talking about is a missile defense array, an array of layered defenses like we have in the Pacific, also on the East Coast. We're taking a hard look at it. And the decisions are not yet made, but we owe the studies back to the Secretary of Defense for decision.
So as you know, Mr. Secretary, Fort Drum was selected as the preferred location for an East Coast missile defense capability. In the 2019 MDR, it directs 12 follow-on studies that should be conducted for missile defense to include the necessity of an East Coast site. Is that study complete? Are you able to share the results of that study? If not, when can we expect those results?
Yeah, those are great questions. I don't have the answer. Let me take that back and get back to you, Congresswoman.
Great. Really important for my district, very important for our broader missile defense discussions. Shifting gears, I wanted to ask about coronavirus. Last night, U.S. Forces Korea confirmed the first case of a soldier with coronavirus. And given the metastasization that we're seeing within CENTCOM and EUCOM and around the world, whether it's in Italy, whether it's in the Middle East, How is DoD addressing this? And particularly, what is your perspective on the potential impact for our joint training exercises and our overall readiness?
Sure. It's so first of all, many of the commands have established plans for dealing with things like this. I'm sure the chairman can speak to that. On 1st of February, as this emerged coming out of China, I signed a campaign plan that directed NORTHCOM to integrate all of our operations with regard to the coronavirus. The commander, General O'Shaughnessy, has been implementing that. We meet daily, my team, on a basis. There's also an interagency team working this. Between him and OSD staff, personnel and readiness, we've issued a variety of memorandums advising the force on how to deal with the coronavirus, the tools in their toolkit. We continue to respond to requests for information. I've empowered the commanders. In this case, Indo-PACOM, I met with Admiral Davidson yesterday, but I get frequent updates from General Abrams on the peninsula with regard to what's happening in Korea. But we're taking a look at all this. My first priority is protection of our people, both service members and families, and then make sure we protect our ability to accomplish our mission. So those are the two priorities for me. And then third, I want to make sure we can support the interagency as they need support from DoD and what we bring to the table.
And with respect to exercises we're taking a look at specifically, as you know, the center of gravity of the thing is in China, but South Korea, Japan, some other countries, Italy, in fact, in Europe, are the next countries that have the highest number of infected cases. So we're taking a hard look at that with the joint exercises with the Republic of Korea Army that are coming up and whether or not they continue, postponed, or modified. We're waiting for the final recommendations of General Abrams and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the Iraq Army, General Park, to see what those are. More broadly, though, I want to put some of this in context. Coronavirus is a very serious thing. We, the U.S. military, and we, the Department of Defense, are taking all kinds of appropriate precautions. We've enacted one of our global pandemic plans to work this, and that's what he was talking about with O'Shaughnessy, et cetera. But we also need to keep it in context as well.
And I do apologize, Mr. Chairman. The general lady's time has expired. I think that's
Roger that. The rest of it will be for the record, ma'am.
Thanks.
Mr. Carbajal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Esper, the President's budget requests funding to begin Phase 1 for the W-93 nuclear warhead. However, as late as August 2019, the NNSA referred to a, quote, next Navy warhead, unquote, but estimated that the weapon would not need funding until 2023. I have a three-part question. Why has the timeline shifted forward by 2 years? 2, does the department plan to maintain the 3 other warheads in the submarine leg, the W-76-1, the 76-2, and the W-88, if this warhead is developed? And 3, the 76-1 life was extended only a few years ago, and the W-88 is about to enter production. Both will last a decade. Why the rush?
Congressman, I'd have to refer you to NNSA on those questions. Maybe number 2 I can help on and get back to you, but those certainly 1 and 3 are NNSA questions. I don't have the answer for you at this point in time.
I'd appreciate your follow-up. Well, 2, let me continue with you, Secretary Esper. As we all know, New START is expected to expire in February 2021, in just 1 year. What are the risks for allowing New START to expire without a replacement? Is negotiating an extension a priority for the administration this year?
The administration is, I have not yet met at my level yet with my counterparts to discuss the way forward. We hope to engage on that soon. Beyond that, there's nothing I can add to the question you've asked.
That's disconcerting. Well, let me continue with General Milley. The Philippines is a treaty ally of the United States and is a partner in our efforts to fight against terrorism. The U.S. signed the Visiting Forces Agreement, VFA, and an Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement as a sign of our close defense partnership. With the government of the Philippines submitting a notice of termination of the VFA, have you been in contact with your counterparts to decide next steps in the U.S.-Philippine defense relationship? And 2, will this decision impact our freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea? And 3, how will the termination affect the Philippine government's ability to combat terrorist organizations?
We have concerns about the notification to terminate, and it's a 6-month notification, so we've got 6 months to work it out. I have not yet personally called my counterpart on that notification. I do intend to do that, but I'm still working through the staff exactly what our position is going to be. If it is implemented, and again, this is 6-month notification, if that is implemented, then yes, it would have an impact on U.S. military force posture and our exercises and a wide variety of other things. We want access, basing, overflight rights, those sorts of things in relative to the South China Sea. Philippines is key. We've had a long-standing relationship with the Philippines. We want to keep our visiting forces agreement in place, if possible. That'll be a decision for the Philippine government, but we think it's an important thing for the mutual defense of both the Philippines and the United States.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary and Chairman, I am, number one, I'm very concerned about security at our southern border. Always have been, not just at our southern border, but all our borders, all our ports of entry, and our entire immigration policy to make sure that we're only letting folks who are friendly to the United States in. That being said, I think we risk a whole lot with the $3.8 billion reprogramming to fund a border wall without consulting with Congress. And at a minimum, I think it would be much easier, and that we would, for short-term progress, if you at least discuss with the chair and ranking member what we're going to reprogram and how we're going to reprogram. I think at a minimum, if you discuss with those two, that would make that a whole lot more palatable to all of us. That being said, I'm supportive of the President's policy on the border, but we have to be careful about how we reprogram. Now, I want to talk about the $3.8 billion. The National Guard is 40% of our combat forces. Yet the cuts in the reprogramming of the $3.8 billion is $1 billion, or 30% of the total budget comes out of the Guard. I think that is alarming to me, because if we're relying on 40% of our force to be able to fight tomorrow, as General Milley has said over and over again, we got to be able to fight tonight. We've got to get those guys in the fight. And what we're doing is taking away the ability for them to keep pace with our active component counterparts with equipment. So Secretary Esper and Chairman Milley, just please tell me that you are planning on making sure that our Guard and Reserve will continue to be an operational force with these cuts and future cuts.
Mr. Kelly, the Guard and Reserve are actually very important critical components of the total force, whether it's Army or Air Force. Everywhere I travel around the world, I see Guardsmen and Reservists standing shoulder to shoulder with active duty. The integration is seamless. Their professionalism is exceptional. And so I think there is the commitment by me, I'm sure by the chairman, he'll speak to it, and the services to make sure that the Guard and Reserve has the tools and equipment and everything they need to perform those important missions.
And Secretary,
You got my commitment as well.
Thank you. I knew that, Chairman Milley. I knew the answer from both of you. I was hoping. The second part of that is we have the Futures Command, which I think is the absolute way that we need to start acquisition, and it is a great program. And the development is, have been we're doing great things in the Futures Command. What concerns me is when I see the patch chart for the fielding, there are no Guard and Reserve units in that fielding. I think we need to make sure that we don't field next generation stuff to the active component and then give the left behinds to the Guard and Reserve. And I hope that when we look at the fielding of those systems, and I don't think there's a proportionality thing there. I think it's the units that are going down range to do the mission ought to be on the newest and best equipment the United States has to offer. Do you guys agree with that?
I do. I'm a little surprised. I know the last time we discussed this in our previous rules, and certainly General McConville and Secretary McCarthy agreed. I recall National Guard units being some of the early fielders of some of the equipment we were considering. So I'll certainly take that back and have them follow up with you.
Thank you. And I may just have missed it. I just want to make sure that they're on that. The second thing I want to talk about is I just got back from Africa with Senator Inhofe. And I can tell you every African president, prime minister that we met with while we were there, all the military and State Department folks that we met with were there, we do not need to reduce the number of troops that we have. It's a great economy of force mission. I think we get great return for investment I think we have some real threats, both terrorists and great power competition in that region. And I just think that we need to be judicious in making sure that we don't reduce the amount of troops there. We at least keep them the same or either invest a little more to make sure, because I think the return on investment is great. And the final thing that I'll say in my final 40-something seconds is I hope that we will continue to stay committed and work with the State Department on the IMET programs. We are losing opportunities that we cannot regain for the next 30 years when all of us will be long gone out of government. We need to make those relationships, and I use it as a point in case. When I was in Iraq a week ago, the Chad, I actually served with him in 5 in Iraq. That relationship matters. That familiarity matters. And so I think we need to make sure we continue to invest in IMET and not be so quick to take them off the list, Secretary.
Completely agree. In the 6 seconds, I tell you, during my time in uniform, I participated in these programs, sponsored foreign students. You're absolutely correct. I think it's the best investment our country can make. I put 10% growth in a budget this year. I want to get 50% growth by the end of the fight up. We're going to ask for legislative authority to expand it under DOD terms and not just state, so that we can actually then prioritize it and allocate it where we need it as well. But I think it's a great investment for our country, and the more we can do, the better. Thank you.
Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to focus my questions and comments on Africa. I am actually excited that not only did the chairman raise Africa as an issue, but you see that there's bipartisan interest in Africa. It's probably the most we've talked about Africa outside of an AFRICOM posture hearing of all the hearings that I've participated in this committee. And before I say anything or ask a question, I do want to, highlight that Africa is not a monolithic continent, and there's a diversity and variety of challenges and opportunities. So I visited Africa, started in Stuttgart, AFRICOM, when General Townsend, soon after he took command. It was a bipartisan delegation. And I was very much interested in the comment that General Townsend made at the end of January, I think before the Senate. And he said that at AFRICOM, we recognize the strategic environment is changing, and the joint force must orient the bulk of our efforts against China and Russia, even as we counter VEOs that threaten America. In Africa, the CVEO fight is a key component of global power competition, as these efforts are not mutually exclusive. So my question, I mean, we often, great power competition, China, we think Indo-Pacific. Great power competition, Russia, we think Europe. And I'd like you to kind of describe for the committee, in as much detail as you can, what is great power competition with China and Russia in Africa? And is there an intersection with the CVO effort or not?
It's a great question, because this is the strategy, right? The great power competition is global with China and Russia, but we'll just focus on China. We see China busy in South America. Frankly, in every continent, we see.
No, I want to go right to Africa. Let's just stay right on Africa.
No, completely agree, because we see them in the Arctic too. But in Africa, you see them in terms of certain countries maybe trying to get port authorities, maybe access to critical materials, minerals, etc. So that is happening through not all of Africa, but through many critical parts. Obviously, they're in Djibouti. And so as we look at the continent, all 53, 54 countries, we've got to ask ourselves, what's important to us? And and make sure we sustain that, if not improve that. And then what are the Chinese going after and why, and understanding that. And it may or may not require a presence by either the military or state or USAID or whoever the case may be.
So you, in response to a letter that I wrote along with 10 of my colleagues, bipartisan letter, you did respond. I appreciate it. And you mentioned today about the SFAB substitution for the 101st Airborne. The commander, Brigadier General Jackson, he commented recently that they're not going to have the military structure like they had in Afghanistan, and network of bases, supply chains, readily available helicopters and other lift. What are we doing to ensure that the SFAB has the infrastructure they need to do their job?
Well, obviously,
what is that investment?
Obviously, two different theaters. Africa, very austere. I might let the chairman speak to this, but we're not going to put them out there without the means to do their job. They are, again, ideally suited, prepared, trained, organized to do the train, advise, and assist mission, and we'll make sure they have what they need to get the job done.
Yeah, I'd like to hear detail because I've been to Kuala in West Niger. I've been to Diffa in East Niger. Special operators do a great job out there in kind of sparse conditions. SFAB is a lot different. Can you please talk maybe in some detail, General Milley, how we're going to support them with the infrastructure?
Yeah, so Steve Townsend, General Townsend, the commander of AFRICOM, is conducting a review, the blank slate review that everyone's talked about. Part of that is the infrastructure. How is he going to adjust the infrastructure based on the prioritization of the countries, based on the U.S. national security interests, and then the SFAB will overlay on top of that, the soldiers from the SFAB. Just so we're clear, though, the SFAB is not Special Operations Forces. However, they are trained and explicitly selected to be able to operate in an expeditionary manner in very austere environments. They knew that going into it. They volunteered for that, and they are specifically trained to train or specifically prepared to train, advise, assist, coach, teach, mentor, and accompany indigenous forces in the conduct of their operations. So the SFABs conduct a foreign internal defense mission. That is their very narrow mission set. They don't do all the other special forces missions, but they are capable of operating in very austere
So let me just use my last 20 seconds in making this comment. I completely understand, but General Jackson made those comments because he does have concerns about the infrastructure support, logistics support that he'll get while he's on the ground. And unlike what we demand in Korea and
Sure.
in other places,
Right.
we cannot ask African nations to foot the bill because they are broke.
Well, the infrastructure for General Jackson and his guys is going to be very austere.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gallagher.
Chairman Courtney, in talking about the shipbuilding plan, I thought delivered an assessment that was tough but fair, and I think reflects bipartisan frustration about the different force structure assessments we've had, the lack of a shipbuilding plan in this case. And so I'd like to just clarify something, Mr. Secretary, that you said. You said in response, I believe, to something he asked, that you had not yet seen the 30-year shipbuilding plan. You're awaiting it to be presented to you. Could you clarify that? Because there was a report yesterday from Breaking Defense that you have been given the plan and have been reviewing it for 2 weeks, but are awaiting that plan versus potentially a plan that's coming from CAPE. And this is all just in the spirit of, we want to see the plan. We want to get your vision for what the future fleet looks like and work with you.
No, it's I think there's confusion and a little bit misreporting. So I was briefed last Friday, a few days ago, on the INFSA, which was the Integrated Naval Force Structure Assessment. That I had a lot of questions coming out of that, but that is not the 30-year shipbuilding plan. I asked again the Navy the other day, let's get it on my schedule. Come tell me what your shipbuilding plan is. Break. What I've said, what I want to do is to see what the Navy plan is. CAPE, my own internal think tank, has a plan to get this to 355 plus. And there's some great work going on out there by the think tanks and other places about what the future should look like to deal with, let's say, China in the year 2030 and beyond. And what I said is, what I want to do is get all these great ideas together, get some innovative thinking, and kind of level set the playing field, and let's run these competing plans and to see which one really optimizes what we need for the future. The two things we don't have, however, right now is an approved war plan from which to baseline, and we should have that in a few months here. The other one's going to take time. We can't wait for it, but it's going to be the new joint warfighting doctrine, because we fight as a joint force. We just don't fight as the Navy or as the Air Force or as the Marine Corps. We fight as a joint force, and I want to make sure that I recognize that we're beyond the date that was due, but I want to present to you a right plan, a good plan, and not just something that was generated up and delivered on time. I think we owe you that. The Marine Corps is doing some extraordinary thinking, the Commandant, on how he wants to reorganize his force, and I think we owe you that. The Chairman, I'm going to ask him to review it because he's my senior military advisor, but then present to Congress what is really a well-thought-out, innovative, takes everything into consideration to include surge, sea lift, but a different composition of force.
So just so I understand in simplest terms, you have the Integrated Naval Force Structure Assessment, which you've been briefed on, but you are going to sort of balance that off against potentially an alternative analysis by CAPE, as well as some outside thinkers, come up with what you view to be the force structure assessment, and that will be a source document for the 30-year shipbuilding.
Yeah, we actually kind of have 4 plans right now. You have the 21 plan, you have the FIDIP, you have the INFSA, which is a 10 to 15-year plan, then you have the 30-year plan. As we know, the further you go out, the less credible they become. But I want to look at those. There are some questions with regard to INFSA that I have that I'm concerned about. So an assumption in the INFSA is that the OFRP works. The OFRP hasn't worked for years, so why should we assume that it will work in the future? So there are assumptions I want to go back and have discussions with the Navy about how do we make, and there are others, there's assumptions in there about ships and warfighting that I want to make sure we get right. So when I present you the plan, it's defensible and I feel confident in it, and the chairman feels confident in it, that we think this is where we should be in the future.
Can you give us any, I know this is a very complicated process, but could you give us any sort of notional timeline about when we can expect to be briefed on that? I know it seemed that you were looking over my colleague, Ms. Laurie, and you've made comments in the past.
We've had a lot of conversations.
OFRP, I know. You've made some comments about trying to bring Congress into that process. I think that's wise.
I do. I want to run a process.
Particularly bringing Ms. Laurie into that process because she's smarter on this than most every other human being.
I'm pushing. I've anointed the DepSecDef to run this. I want to move quickly in a matter of a few short months. I want to find key points in there where we can invite interested members of Congress in to look at the process, what we're doing. Does that make sense? Does it pass the common sense test? And then at the end, we see what comes up. I think we should invite the Navy's future leadership into this process, whether they're young ensigns and lieutenants, or whatever the case may be, to help inform this, because they're going to have to, this is the Navy they're going to sell, that they're going to fight. And I just want to kind of open the lens up and get the best assessment from everybody, to include inviting interested members in.
Well, and just to close, I want to commend what you had said earlier about just kind of your hunch about where the fleet needs to go in terms of smaller ships, experimenting with optionally manned, unmanned ships. I think if you can make a geopolitically informed, in other words, something that makes sense in terms of geography and international politics, case to this committee, I think you would find a lot of support, notwithstanding the very real concerns that Chairman Courtney and others have articulated. And
no, thank you. I mean, that is my ambition. Like I said, I'm a big believer in attack subs. From what I've seen, I think we need more than what has been there in the past.
Thank you. Mr. Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary and General, for your service. As you know, Mr. Secretary, we were in Munich with a delegation with Speaker Pelosi, and the delegation was unified in echoing the message that European countries shouldn't be using Huawei. One of the questions that came up from the former president of Estonia was, well, if you're not going to tell us to if you're telling us not to use Huawei, what alternative are you providing? And as you know, there's been a report that suggests that one of the things the United States should be doing is allowing medium and low-range spectrum to be used to develop an alternative. I mean, just the high-speed spectrum isn't sufficient. My question for you is, have you considered that? What do you think we need to do with either Nokia and Ericsson or other industry to help develop alternatives, and whether you'd be willing to come out to the Defense Innovation Unit in Silicon Valley and discuss some of these strategies?
Yes, I would like to come out. I'm actually trying to make a trip out to the West Coast to speak to them and some others. So yes, Congressman, for sure. We have a lot of great Western companies, and I don't want to exclude any Japanese, let's just say non-Chinese companies out there that I think provide great products. I'm very concerned about Huawei. I spoke about it publicly in Munich, as did the Speaker. The DoD is investing hundreds of millions of dollars to set up prototypes at 4 of our bases around the country, where we could invite companies in to test, because we would benefit from 5G. I'm conscious of the time. The last thing I would say on the 5G side is that a lot of U.S. companies at least want to go to the mid-band range. The mid-band range is between 3,100 and 3,550 megahertz. It's where we operate our air defense systems, whether it's AWACS, whether it's Navy Aegis, or Army and Air Corps, Army and Marine Corps air defense systems. Private sector wants that. We need that. We're willing to share it. We think that's the way is to share this. The technology is out there, I'm told, to do that. I think that's the best way to move forward, so we can meet the economic priority with the national security priority.
Well, that's encouraging to hear. I appreciate that. My next question concerns encryption. Your department has understandably, and I think rightfully, talked about the importance of encryption. Now, there's some people who are saying, well, let's have a back door. And I guess from a national security perspective, I really don't understand that. I mean, if you were to tell Apple to have a backdoor key to get into every iPhone, would you really want to risk having Apple have that technology that could be hacked by any employee or the Chinese and then have access to every phone in this country or world? And so, you know, it seems that the administration actually has different approaches to encryption.
Yeah, What specific question can I answer?
So, your department has said encryption is really important to protect these phones. The Attorney General is asking Apple or some other companies to create a backdoor key. Now, a backdoor key, just to be clear, would be Apple would have it. So basically, any employee at Apple, if you create a backdoor key, would be able to break into any phone. And who knows who's working at Apple? I guess I just would wonder whether you could be working with the Justice Department to look at the national security implications of having a backdoor to encryption.
Okay, I'm not completely fluent with what the Department of Justice's views on the law enforcement side of it. Clearly, for DOD, we need encryption to pass classified data, operational plans, et cetera, amongst ourselves and with allies and partners. So I can take that back for you.
I appreciate that. And my final question is, when we were in Germany, one thing that struck me is that the Bundestag actually has to approve every increase in troops anywhere around the world. Now, obviously, that's asking a lot for Congress to be able to do that. But is there a way Congress could be more involved in understanding exactly where our troops are and decisions about how many troops we're sending and why, and have input in that?
I think that is been the longstanding prerogative of the Commander-in-Chief. But I do know I believe we have systems where we notify you of deployments. I'd have to check and see, but that's my understanding.
It would be great if we could even get a sense of where all we're deployed and have some ability to have an input in that.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Secretary, I want to start by thanking you for your recent visit to my district. After my constituents were attacked by terrorists, you brought calm and comfort, and I have been very encouraged by our discussions that DOD is doing everything necessary to ensure that we have a productive, safe, working environment for our service members and the service members that we host from foreign countries. And so I thank you for that great progress. I also want to thank you for the development of this budget that seems to prioritize our near-peer adversaries. Mm-hmm. There are enhancements in research, development, test, and evaluation dollars. We're particularly proud of that mission at Eglin Air Force Base, where the eastern Gulf of Mexico is an unparalleled range. There's money in the budget to enhance our ranges, and it's my hope that the department will continue to maintain the strong position opposed to offshore oil drilling, which is not consistent with the launching of experimental missiles, which is, I can't believe something I have to say out loud, but indeed it is. And so thank you for that great work. As the department is raising its gaze under your leadership to meet those challenges of the future against our near-peer adversaries, it's notable to me that we have deconflicted in Syria from what was U.S. involvement in a Syrian civil war with tremendous sectarian violence. In this budget you've presented to us, is there an expectation that our nation would re-engage in the Syrian civil war?
There has not been that discussion about re-engaging in the civil war. We think the best path forward is through the UN process that is underway. And that needs to be pursued vigorously. I know the State Department is pushing that as well, and obviously the situation has become a lot more complicated in Idlib province right now, given the confluence of many actors.
And in our current role, securing oil fields so that the Kurds are able to maintain their own resistance and to have resources to do that, is it our expectation in this budget that we would be funding efforts to reinsert Americans on the Turkish-Syria border in that area where Americans were previously withdrawn?
Our current mission, Congressman, is to ensure the continuing defeat of ISIS in that eastern portion of Syria, working alongside our SDF partners. That happens on a daily basis. At this point in time, I don't see any likelihood that we would be back along the border, if you will. That's
great news. And General Milley, I recall a conversation we had where you informed me that the only correct decision in your mind that the president could have made was the decision the president in fact did make, to take the tens of Americans on the Syria-Turkey border and to remove them from that conflict zone. Is that still your position?
It is, and I would just reinforce what the Secretary said. Our mission remains, primary mission remains a counter-ISIS mission there in the eastern parts of Syria, and to my knowledge there's no intent nor plans to reengage in the Syrian civil war, nor put troops back on the Syrian-Turkish border.
Again, great news. I very much look forward to the Trump presidency being one where we end our involvement in some of these wars rather than reigniting new conflicts in new places for newfound reasons that distract us from that important national security strategy focus that I think the two of you have led quite deftly. In budgetary times, we're always looking forward, but at times it's appropriate to look back at the decisions the Congress has made and determine whether or not we've got the right focus. And I'm specifically referencing House Joint Resolution 77, which was supported by most of the members of this committee, Republican and Democrat, and it was very critical of the administration's decision to disengage from that civil war. And specifically in the whereas clause of that resolution, it says, whereas an abrupt withdrawal of United States military personnel from certain parts of northeast Syria is beneficial to the adversaries of the United States government. I'm wondering if you concur with that statement, or now with the benefit of hindsight, we could say that disengaging from that conflict zone actually was beneficial to the United States government and our position.
I think from a military standpoint, we had two Special Forces ODAs, a very small amount of forces that were facing off against 15,000 Turkish troops, and they were going to come across that border. They were prepared to come across that border. They told us to come across that border, and we had very, very little choice except to remove them from the avenues of attack that the Turks were going to do. Otherwise, we would have unnecessarily jeopardized their lives for no purpose.
And given that decision that we made, I think very correctly, despite the fact that many of my colleagues disagree with it, I agree with it, are we sensing that there is some insurmountable resurgence of ISIS that we're not prepared to deal with as a consequence of that sound decision?
We know that ISIS, the caliphate, the physical entity, has been eliminated. We also know that ISIS as an organization is not yet destroyed. They have broken down into small groups, and they're continuing to conduct insurgency and terrorist operations in a very disparate and disaggregated way. But they are no longer the threat that they were just a year ago.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Cisneros.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, both for being here today. Policy cooperation between the U.S. and South Korea has been at best inconsistent under the Trump and Moon administrations. I'm concerned with the department's plan to move forward with basing U.S. troops in South Korea and maintaining operational readiness given the underlying tensions associated with an expired special measures agreement. The President's administration's demanded that South Korea increase its payments to the U.S. by 400% in the administration's public statements, questioning whether or not the presence of U.S. troops in South Korea is even in our interest. General Milley, what is the strategic significance of basing U.S. troops on the Korean Peninsula, and how does it positively impact our national security?
We have a bilateral defense agreement with the Republic of Korea, and that requires, the requirement has been for 7 decades now to have forces there to prevent an outbreak of yet another Korean War. And I would argue that you can never prove a negative as to why something didn't happen, but I would argue that U.S. forces in South Korea have deterred North Korean aggression, territorial aggression, and have prevented the outbreak of a second Korean War. I think that outbreak of that war is, the prevention of that is in the U.S. national security interest for general stability in Northeast Asia, but also for global stability. So I think it is a vital U.S. national security interest to maintain our treaty agreement with South Korea and maintain U.S. forces there.
All right. So we want to make sure that we do maintain the U.S. forces on the Korean Peninsula.
That's my military opinion. That's correct.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Also, the U.S. desire to maintain rule-based international order in the Indo-Pacific AOR with China's desire to build military capability and expand influence in the region. What policies are in place to prevent potential escalation of hostilities should an act of aggression be perceived by either side towards the other on a tactical level? Can you identify any potential gaps in communication between senior leaders on either side of the operational or strategic levels in order to de-escalate a potential volatile situation should it arise?
Jumbo, with China?
Yes, sir.
Specifically? Well, a couple of things. Both in air and maritime, we maintain communication systems that we do communicate to each other so that we don't have inadvertent incidents at sea or in the air that could then escalate. So there's an escalation control mechanism. I have and will continue to maintain a communication channel with my counterpart. I know the Secretary does as well, and I know the Commander U.S. PACOM or Indo-PACOM has channels of communication, try to de-escalate any kind of issue. At the broader geostrategic level, I think it's in our national security interest to continue to maintain adequate forces there. And at the end of the day, it goes towards that great power competition and the preservation of great power peace. The last thing that anyone needs is a war between China and the United States or a war between Russia and the United States. So great power war is a really bad thing, and great power peace has been maintained for 7.5 decades, and we want to continue that legacy of maintaining that peace.
And just one more question about China. In what specific areas is the People's Republic of China investing in terms of military capability, and how are we countering their investments?
Without going into specific classification, I think China is, since the Deng Xiaoping's reforms in 1979, they've made huge